And so I'll introduce the webinar, and our speaker for this evening, Will Richardson. So as I say, the recording's now started, and Will, do you want to share the slides for the?
I'll share those now, Rosanna. Yeah.
And then we can make a start.
Hopefully that's coming up okay.
Yep, I believe so.
Right, I'll flick through to the next one then and let you do a bit of introductory stuff.
So for those that don't know, the Northwoods Innovation Programme is effectively a platform to support and develop innovative approaches to woodland management, with the specific aim of developing new tools and new methods to help owners and other forestry stakeholders manage woodlands, and particularly with a focus on bringing currently unmanaged woodlands into better management. So we've kind of got three aspects that we're working in. We're demonstrating and sharing innovative tools, whether that's through demonstration events, networking, webinars, also via social media and case studies. We've also got support for innovators. So if you've got an innovative idea or you need support developing or adjusting a tool for forestry purposes, then we've got a range of forestry experts that can support you with that. And then we're also developing our own innovative tools with the Northwoods Consortium. And in particular, we're developing tools that can be used through My Forest, which is an online mapping tool to help woodland owners and managers map and manage woodlands. But ultimately, we've re-established a woodland initiative and a forestry sector support programme in the North East and the Yorkshire region, with funding from the Forestry Commission and their Woods into Management Forestry Innovation Funds. So who are we? We are a group of experts that have a track record of delivering kind of forestry support projects. It's being led by Reheat, who are biomass engineering and forestry consultancy. That's who I'm part of. We've also got Martin Glynn, who's 30 years experience in forestry and rural business support, RDI Associates, Silver Foundation, and Timber Auctions, who operate Europe's leading roundwood marketing service. And if you were with us last week, you'll have heard Ollie Coombe from Timber Auctions talking about how to sell your timber. And as I mentioned, because we're recording these, if you did miss it and you want to know more, you can go onto our YouTube channel and watch that back. This evening, we're talking about how to engage forestry contractors. We've got Will Richardson from RDI Associates here to guide you through how to engage forestry contractors and get the most from them and when managing your woodlands. So if we could ask everyone to leave, I think the microphone's on mute, and then we'll have a chat function at the end to ask questions. You can also raise your hand. So Will do a short presentation, and then we'll have a chance for questions and answers at the end. So without further ado, Will, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Rosanna. Hopefully I'm coming across loud and clear. Just do shout and let me know if there's any lag. I did notice I was having some problems earlier in the day with my internet connection, so just shout if something untoward's happening. This is about all three key aspects of woodland management, all three key players involved in the woodland management process, from the owner to the manager. That could be both the owner and the manager, it could be a combined role, and the contractor as well. And hope to just give you some information and pointers about how that whole process, that whole relationship can work smoothly to the benefit of everybody involved. I think when we put out information about this particular webinar, we sort of mentioned that contractors are at the sharp end of things, and giving them information and good quality information is critical to a successful outcome for everybody involved. So we're kind of focusing on that. So we'll talk about terms of engagement. What is it that you want the contractor to do? We'll talk about mapping of information, and this links to Rosanna's earlier point about one of the key areas we're investigating as part of this project is mapping and adding on good mapping tools to My Forest and making those available. There's a webinar next Tuesday about geospatial PDFs in particular. I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit more detail a bit later on. We'll look at health and safety, environmental considerations, and then we'll finish on agreements and contracts. Some of that will be familiar to those of you who attended last week's timber sales presentation. So we'll be going over similar ground there, and then we'll allow plenty of time for questions and answers. Hopefully I won't be talking for longer than 25 minutes, half an hour, to allow plenty of time for questions and answers. So in terms of engagement, I mean, essentially, what do you want the contractor to do? What is it that you're inviting them to do for you? Is it purchase and fell the standing trees? Therefore, they will market the timber. Again, we covered this at last week's seminar. Do you want them to fell an extract to roadside, and you, the woodland owner or woodland manager, would market the timber separately? That would mean that the contractor would expect to be paid on a day or indeed tonnage rate. There's other, obviously, non-timber sales related work, such as tree safety, conservation related activity, and possibly infrastructure related activity, so roading, etc., etc. So, you know, there's various elements there, but what I'll do is I'll talk you through some common themes that are relevant to all those different terms of engagement, those three different points there. Like I say, we've discussed timber sales at last week's webinar in some detail, and as Rosanna said, that's available as a recorded video on the Northwoods YouTube channel. I think if I asked Martha, Rosanna, you can come up as Martha, Rosanna. If I asked Rosanna just to talk us through how maybe we can access those presentations, those recorded presentations, a bit later on, that'd be great. Help me as well. So let's move on to mapping of information. So this is really critical. The clear mapping of boundaries, hazards, access routes, haul routes, and key features. I'll show you some example maps of that. And in addition to mapping of those key features is information on the timber. So if you're selling it, what are you selling? The species, the age, called diameter at breast height. That gives an indication of the type of product that you're selling. So the contractor can immediately say, well, you know, the diameter is this, therefore there could be a certain percentage of saw log involved in that. Top height's useful, and then through DBH and top heights you can come up with things like stand volumes as well. That's all really useful information. The more that you can come up with, the better quality there is. It's easier for everybody involved if you have that information up front. And again, we'll show you some examples of that in a minute or two. But this is something we're trying to build into the MyForest platform and make this more readily available, or access to this information more readily available and easier to access. And then information on the sale, if applicable, if you are selling the timber. So that could be, as I've put here, terms and conditions of the sale. So payment terms, insurance requirements, health and safety compliance, biosecurity compliance. All that's also relevant to non-timber sales contracts as well, of course. What I would say you do as a minimum is prepare a document that sets out the following information. The ownership, who owns the land in question. So the ownership and the management might be two different things. And I'll come up to giving you some simple definitions between who is the landowner, what their responsibilities are, who might be the forest manager, the forest works manager, and who their responsibilities are, and who the contractor is and what their responsibilities are in all this too. What's the location? So address. A lot of people are using what 3 words these days, grid reference. All that information set out clearly. The parcel details. So if you're selling timber, what's the area? What inventory information you've got? So your DBHs, your top heights, your stand volumes, etc. Clear ownership boundaries, really important as well. And then your regulatory information, so felling license reference numbers, woodland management plan reference numbers, or indeed if the timber's certified as well. There's quite a few timber buyers, contractors out there who are who have chain of custody, so it's useful to pass on that forest certification information if you have it. And like I say, terms and conditions of the sale. So a lot of these we covered in a lot more detail in last week's webinar. So thinking about that information that we've collated and presenting it in mapping format, in simple maps, nice and easy to understand, something you could possibly view on a smartphone as you're walking around, or print out, put on a clipboard. So useful for when you're having things like pre-start meetings, etc. So this is what we're trying to, or we are aiming to develop as part of the Northwoods project. So a simple location map. Where is the wood? Where's the access points? Where are the access tracks? Where are the woodland boundaries, the ownership boundaries? So a nice simple map we can see there that has a clearly identified access route in, a main access point into the woodland there, and we've got a grid reference to show it. You could add in things like 3 words as well, and then things like suggested timber extraction routes that we've marked on there. And I'll show you those in a little bit more close up in a second. So nice, clear. That's an OS base on there. That's the kind of base maps that My Forests use on their system as well. We've then got our constraints map. So I put quite a lot of information onto this one, which I think is relevant. So the first thing you might notice is there's a triple SI here on the west of the woodland ownership western boundary. The reason why I've mapped that is because the access route in just touches on the triple SI. So there may be requirements that you need to inform either the owner there on that particular piece of land, or indeed Natural England is the regulator of triple SIs, that you're wanting to cross that land to get your timber out. So that's quite important, and that should be shown to your contractor, your timber purchaser as well. There's obviously a moorland line there too. And then other features, we've got veteran trees marked on there. We've got some old stone walls, which is a bit of a historic environment feature that we need to be aware of. There's a scheduled monument down here, that orange dot. So you've got a lot going on this one. And then the actual felling area, and I'll show you a close-up of that in a second, is compartment 2. Just on the corner of compartment 2, there's an old penfold. Again, a historic environment feature that we should mark on and clearly find the location so we avoid any damage to it during harvesting operations. There's other features that are worth pointing out. There's crisscross of public rights of way across the site, so obviously you want to sign correctly, and there's ancient woodland as well on the site too. So quite a lot going on. So just an example of a constraints map. Obviously, as landowners, woodland owners, and indeed forest managers, you'll have readily access to this information. If you don't, then there are tools out there to help you find this information, particularly if you're going through a woodland management planning exercise. Even if you've just gone through a felling license application, a lot of this information should have been, you should have found out this and mapped it clearly as well when you go to that stage where you want someone to come in and do the work for you. So just a close-up of the parcel that we want to fell. This is parcel number 2. It's just over a hectare. It's Norway spruce, and again we've marked on their suggested extraction route there to that point, and then the main access track out there. So that's sort of a series of maps that set out the information in a nice clear format. And we're, like I say, we're hoping to sort of develop this as an accessible and available tool through My Forest, and then to link that to the timber auction site to make that again available and compatible, to make that information easier to understand, easier to follow, and hopefully make the whole process easier too. And we're going to do that by trying to create, let's call it a brochure, a sales brochure in particular. So it might be more than one page, but this is just an example of a one-page. You could present it on a PDF or a JPEG. You could look at it on a smartphone whilst you're walking around site. So you've got your some of your particulars here, who the owners are, the agent, the location, your parcel details, area, your felling license reference there, species. I've put in productive area. I think that's very useful to understand that there's certain areas that won't be productive, such as the penfold, or areas adjacent to walls, there might be rides, etc. that are there. Your average tree DBH, top height, and then average tree volume. Good information to present. So we've got a location map, a constraints map, and I showed you these three, and the parcel that we want felling there, showing the clear boundaries of where that is. And then the terms and conditions of sale. So just some example points there. Payment terms, monthly deposit, bonds, etc. Again, Ollie covered this in his presentation last week. What the minimum insurance requirements might be, any health and safety compliance that might be, worth pointing out at that stage, other than what we'd normally expect by security compliance. How the timber's going to be sold. So is it price per ton, price per grade, etc. Or indeed, if you're not selling the timber, you might want to put in there other terms and conditions according to the contract. So maybe pointing out specific constraints as well. And then things like recording of the timber records, weighbridge tickets, etc. And then important things like validity of offers, etc. That's just a summary, one pager. I think this kind of presentation of information is going to be useful, particularly as people start to use digital information more and more, and we can pull these together using digital tools, cut down on printing out bits of paper and carrying around clipboards, etc. That can only be a good thing. So back to our key topics here. So we've talked about our terms of engagement, our mapping of information, and then drilling down into a bit more detail about health and safety and environmental related information that's going to be useful for the landowner, the forest works manager, and the contractor in a successful operation. So this is quite important, our safety considerations. So the roles and responsibilities of those three parties, and I'll show you some definitions in a second. Who is responsible for what on that work site? Access to available information. So FISA, the Forest Industry Safety Accord, I've mentioned these guys previously in webinars we've done. Really, really good quality information that they have on staying safe. There's a main safety guide for those that work in forestry that's freely available off their website, and access to detailed FISA guides for all and every forest operation you can think of, from windblow clearance to mechanical harvesting to motor manual harvesting. It's all there on the website, and very well worth looking at and using to help inform gathering information when you want to present that to somebody that is going to do the work for you. Competencies. So what is the competencies of the people involved? So that might be safety training certificates, for example, chainsaw, machine operation, pesticides use. There's a whole raft, first aid. There's a whole raft out there, and it's useful to understand what the competencies are. Do they have the correct competencies to do the work that you're wanting them to do? Insurance, what would be your minimum insurance requirements? So obviously public liability is important for working on somebody else's land. That's critical, and obviously if they are an employer, then employer's liability insurance too. And what I would say is very key is a pre-start meeting between all the parties concerned, the landowner, the forest manager, forest works manager, and the contractor too. You can cover off your emergency procedures. So for example, it sounds obvious, but it's easy to forget about this. Is there a mobile phone reception on the work site? If not, where is the nearest point where you can get a good, reliable mobile phone reception, for emergency purposes. And then contact information of local A&E services, what 3 words, locations, contact information of the landowner, forest works manager, all those involved. I tend to include things like contact information for power companies where there's overhead power lines concerned, and environment agency if you're working next to water courses in case there's any pollution incidences as well. But that's all useful, good considerations there. Roles and responsibilities. So here's just a very brief definition of the different roles and responsibilities of those involved. So from the landowner, that's the person that controls the land on which the work takes place, and it's their responsibility to provide information on hazards and constraints of the site. So they identify that information to the forest works manager. Now the landowner can also be the forest works manager, vice versa. And it's advisable that the landowner, where they might not have that specialist knowledge, would take advice from those that are sufficiently knowledgeable to give advice. So that might be, for example, if they're competent as a forest manager, there might be sensitivities around biodiversity, for example. Working around areas where there's known to be protected species, you might need to engage the services of an ecologist, for example. The forest works manager would be the person that commissions the work on a forestry site. So I refer back to my earlier point, that could be a combined role between the landowner and the forest manager. They should be preparing really good quality information on the work site, including risk assessments, pointing out where the haulage routes are, and should be working to appoint competent contractors to do the work. So I mentioned about competencies, safety certification, but also with the right equipment and machinery to be able to do the job as well. The forest works manager would be responsible for supervising the work and ongoing health and safety requirements on the site. So the contractor, like I say, they're at the sharp end of all this. They provide the forestry service, and they would work with the forest works manager to ensure that health and safety standards are met, and they would manage their employees and subcontractors to ensure they work safely. Now that's just a real short summary of those roles and responsibilities, and the FISA guides do provide that more information about that as well, and I do recommend looking those up. So moving on to environmental considerations. I don't know how many of you may be managing or owning smaller woodlands, but they are particularly vulnerable to environmental damage during harvesting or contracting operations, and this may be a result of inappropriate machinery being used. So let's say farm tractors, they might be rutting up the ground too much, and that might lead to diffuse pollution, for example. Whereas a lot of forest machines have a lower ground impact. They're able to spread the weight across their axles better. As an example, there might be a limited supply of brash on the site, again, to spread that weight and reduce impact on the soil. There might be poor working practices, so we may have not taken into account protection of watercourses on the site. My maps before clearly showed there was a watercourse to the western boundary of the woodland that we were managing, and that's downslope where we had our work planned. So we would obviously need to be mindful of any potential pollution incidences, whether that's diffuse pollution or spills from fuel, oil, etc. Small woodlands may have access restrictions to certain times of the year. That may be down to the landowner. There may be other activities that are going on. Obviously, avoiding bird nesting season, that kind of thing is important to take into consideration as well. Obviously, you want to avoid the use of unskilled labour. As I said before, competencies are key in all this, and making sure that those involved have the right competencies and the correct machinery as well. And work should be planned to minimise environmental impacts, taking account of protecting soil, vegetation, wildlife, water and archaeology. Again, there are useful information out there. COM4 have recently published a short guide to protecting the environment on forestry work sites. Again, I think these are some, we can put some of these links out, can't we, Rosanna, later on for people to look at themselves in their own time. Okay, not far off now. So the other important consideration is your terrain. So, you know, you need to think about the steepness of the land. Is it rocky? Is it particularly slippery when it's wet? So firmness, roughness, slope, all these things are important. And I would certainly point these out if I had these features in woods that I was looking after. I'd point those out on my constraints map. And at any pre-start meeting is identify these features in advance. So the contractor, the purchaser of the timber, can plan for that. So yeah, I'm aware of that, and I can build that into my my program, my pricing, whatever it might be. And then access. Getting access to the site for machines. Obviously, if you're bringing in relatively large forest machines, you're going to need good access. You're going to be able to need to get a wagon in, a low loader, and equally shipping the timber out. You're going to be able to have to get wagons in to do that. And then inwood access as well, main extraction routes. You may need to be firming up tracks beforehand to prevent damage, putting in culverts and pipes, etc., to get water away as well. Might be needed. And then think about extraction distances. And, you know, long distances, long routes for hauling timber out to a point where it can be collected by a timber wagon will have an economic impact. And then tree protection. So, you know, think about, you know, skidding damage, maybe to standing trees, or damage to roots as well. And then we'll move on to, I jumped ahead, no I haven't, apologies, plant health and biosecurity. So our woodlands are becoming more vulnerable to a variety of pests and pathogens. Just some current examples there in pine, larch, oak and ash. And I definitely agree biosecurity measures as well, certainly as part of the pre-start meeting, and follow the latest best practice about that. And the Forestry Commission's Keep It Clean campaign has useful information there for us to refer to as well. Just wrapping up very quickly, we touched on this at last week's webinar, agreements and contracts, a very brief introduction. We've run through some of these points already, so description of what it is we're selling or what the work is. I mentioned regulatory information, and then obviously price, method, terms of payments, any special conditions, so identifying any special site constraints, health and safety at work, our pre-start meeting, mentioned that too, and then other important points would be damage. So who's responsible for making good any damage to tracks? So I'm quite keen to set out right at the very start for anyone that's interested in doing work to ensure that there's contingency there for reinstatement, particularly if you're using your woodland for other activities other than, let's say, timber. Maybe you're accessing it for your own leisure purposes, or you've got shooting going on. You would want your tracks to be readily accessible after any activity. So set aside contingencies, agree that beforehand. Set out your insurance requirements and indemnity requirements, like I said, biosecurity. Termination, consider reasons for terminations. That might be severe weather, ground conditions, fire or windblow events. Set start and end dates. Obviously, there may need to be flexibility within that. And in terms of ongoing contract management, all parties should agree how this will be done, through site meetings, frequency, and then obviously contract sign off as well. Once the work's done, how does the contract end? So that's pretty much the main points I've covered there. Just to come back to this mapping issue, we've got the guys at My Forest presenting their geospatial mapping tool at next week's webinar. So a quick plug on that one. Hopefully as many as possible can join us on that. I'm certainly going to join in on that one. So yeah, questions. Should I come out of the share screen, Rosanna?
Yeah, do you want to come out and then
we'll go to questions.
So if you could raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, or you can pop it in the chat. The raise hand function is just, it should be along the top of your screen, and it just looks like a hand with, it says raise underneath it. Alternatively, you can pop it in the chat, which looks like a little speech bubble. Again, it could be at the top of your screen or down at the bottom. So I don't know if you've got any questions. Anyone wants to start us off? It doesn't look like we've got any questions straight away, Will.
I'm sure there are.
I was going to say, what might be a commonly asked question when trying to engage a forestry contractor?
I think I'd probably flip that question and say, what might be the common questions that contractors might ask of us, those involved in woodland management and looking after woodlands? I do come back to this this key point of good quality information. Even if you're not wanting much work done, or you're not selling your timber, there's other activities you want somebody to do for you, I think you still should go through the same processes of understanding what those site constraints are, and agreeing up front clearly with the person that you're getting to do the work, identifying all these constraints and features and hazards, and it just works a lot better. The whole process works for everybody involved a lot better. Definitely setting aside contingencies, contingency planning, particularly if you know, we've had a really dry winter up until the last couple of weeks, and suddenly it's got a bit wet and soggy, and you know, you suddenly find that all your tracks and everything are getting damaged, and when you first set about, you know, doing the work, you thought, oh, it's nice and dry and there's no issue here, but you know, a few weeks down the line, everything's got a bit wet and damage is occurring. So it's to say, well, look, it may be good now, but if it starts raining, where are we going to be? So definitely contingency planning is critical, and agreeing that with your contractor, and just keeping the dialogue going, keeping the discussion open, regular, well, not too regular meetings that you're interrupting the work site too much, but certainly regular meetings and regular discussions are welcome between all parties, definitely.
So that was going to be my next question, was, you know, if you've got someone undertaking works, you know, perhaps how often should you look at the works or engage with the contractor? You know, is it a case of, they're doing the job, they know what they're doing, right, I'll walk away and leave them to it? You know, should there be some sort of inspection process?
Well, yeah, of course. I think they appreciate that too. That they know that they're doing the right thing. You know, you can say, well, look, you know, you've got all the right competencies, you've got great experience. I mean, not a bad thing getting references out, of course. Yeah, I think agreeing that beforehand is good. To say, look, let's have a fortnightly meeting or a weekly meeting. And everyone says, yeah, that's great, let's do it. And we'll make sure that you know, the contractor knows that they're doing the right thing, that they're working in the right areas, that they're doing what you want them to do. And likewise, you're happy with progress and how things are going on. So yeah, it depends really, Rosanna, the scale of things. I mean, a smaller scale job may only go on for a week or two, so a couple of meetings might be sufficient. Bigger scale jobs might go on for a few weeks, so yeah, weekly, fortnightly meetings might be useful.
And how might I know if a contractor is competent? What sort of stuff should I look for?
So I asked for copies of their safety training certificates ultimately. I know that doesn't necessarily say they're competent, but in the eyes of the law, it says you check that they've got the right safety training to operate machinery, and therefore that kind of fits in with their insurance cover, whether that's public liability or employer's liability. But yeah, it's important to check that. First aid is important, and then if they are operating machines, do they have the right training to do that? But like I say, you know, you can get a competency certificate. It's really, you learn thereafter out in the woods, and that can take months, if not years, to be fully competent. I think that's something that the sector's always sort of said that yeah, you can go and get your training and operate and get a ticket to operate a machine, but actually your real experience and training comes thereafter. No two work sites are the same, and you're only going to get experience if you're going to work a vast range of work sites, and that takes time to develop that. But yeah, that's what I would ask for up front is certainly that you know copies of it's usually everyone's got photo cards now, little sort of credit card size photo cards that shows the competencies that they have, whether it's from MPTC or Lantra or other training providers.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Whether it's specifically about engaging forestry contractors or
anything else,
management processes. You know, we've got some time to talk about all things woodland management. If there's another question that you'd like to ask. I've got some more about forestry contractors if the audience is still listening. Where can I go to find forestry contractors?
It's a good question.
Where should I start to look?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, that's easy for me to answer because I've got a big list of guys that I've known for a while. I mean, look, you know, there's Google. Of course, there is. I'd be a fool to say there isn't Google. This is a discussion, actually, Rosanna, we had with a group of contractors not so long ago, wasn't it? Is how do we find who the woodland owners are, and how do the woodland owners find who we are? Yeah, it's not easy. Okay, I think that's probably a gap in the market, and I think that's something that we're looking at, isn't it? Northwoods project is looking at that. Whether that's some kind of a directory, they're difficult to manage, as we know. Keeping them up to date is hard. Or a brokerage service, we're not quite sure yet, but it's certainly something we're looking into as part of the project. If anyone does, you know, want putting in touch with people, then, you know, I'm sure myself or any of the other Northwoods team members can help with that process. As long as you're in Yorkshire and the North East. I can't help you if you're in the South West or Wales or elsewhere. We might
be able to, but
might
specifically we have North East and Yorkshire knowledge in particular. It's a contractor. Do you get different types of forestry contractors, different specialities?
Oh yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, huge range of guys out there with machines, equipment. You know, from self-employed motor manual guys, chainsaw operators, through to harvesting teams with big machines and everything in between. So horse loggers, guys operating tractors and winches. Yeah, there's a vast range of people. You want to be chatting to them about what they've got, what kit they've got. Is it going to be right for your requirements? I mean, I mentioned small woodlands, particularly sensitive to environmental damage. You want to be looking at lighter, smaller scale equipment that's going to reduce the impact on your wood. Larger areas of woodland will often have good tracks in already that can be used by heavier machines. So that's how I would certainly start my thought processes off along those lines. But yeah, there's a big range of guys out there that can help with the right machines.
Are there any other questions that we Would anyone like to answer? Andy, I see you've got your hand up. I think you should unmute yourself and be able to ask a question.
Yeah, I've got a sort of small woodland, but it's, I was wondering what sort of equipment they would use to harvest. It's probably less than half a hectare, but it's, are they going to try and come in with a big machinery, or are they going to come in with a man with a chainsaw?
Yeah, it sounds like that latter is your better option, Andy. Yeah, I'd avoid using big machines in small woods. It's expensive bringing them in. Just getting a low loader in is, it's £500, £600, £700 a journey, and you've got a return journey there to pay for. So yeah, you want guys that are able to come in with what we call motor manual, with hand cutters, chainsaw operators, and then maybe a smaller scale, lighter, if you are thinning out or taking timber out, whether that's for your own use. You can get guys with very small bits of kit, what we call alpine tractors, and mini forwarders.
So would that be track vehicles and stuff?
Say again, Andy, sorry.
No track. I mean, I was just thinking of how they're going to move the timber about. Is it going to be sort of like tracked vehicles, or?
Well, it depends. Yeah, I mean, you get mini track vehicles. So there's things that are called some people refer to them as iron horses or motorized wheelbarrows, which are on tracks, and you can load timber onto these things, and you can operate them. There's all sorts of kit out there. It's slightly rarer. I mean, there are guys out there with what we call mini forwarders that are very light, compact machines that really have no impact on the forest soil at all, or very, very minimal, even less so than let's say a standard lightweight tractor, because they've got a number of bogies, a number of axles. They're able to spread the weight across those axles, and that therefore reduces the impact on the soil quite considerably. But they're only bringing out a ton, 2 tons of timber at a time, so it's slower going, so the harvesting costs are increased. But you get less damage on your wood, and particularly with a small woodland, you may be saying, well, I just want a bit of thinning, doing a bit of firewood for myself, and I might want to look at getting natural regeneration going, and therefore you really want to be minimising the impact on your soils to try and help achieve that objective of natural regeneration. It's a good question. What's your soil like? What's the steepness of the wood like? Is it steep? Is it flat? Have you got particularly waterlogged soils, or?
It's pretty good actually, but yeah, it's pretty flat and it's pretty good soil. We've got a little water course down one side, it's only drainage ditch, which is fine. I've got quite a bit of wind blowing it though.
Okay.
Is that going to cost more money to get wind blow out than it is to?
Yeah, it depends. Depends how much. I mean, would you be using the timber yourself, or?
I'm hoping to sell it as well.
Yeah. Okay. So you get someone in to say, look, is this possible? I think it's worth having the conversation with somebody. Get a contractor that may be willing to chat to you about the management of a small woodland and say, let's have a look. Let's come out. Let's have a look. Is this possible? Like I say, their costs. I mean, a lot of these guys may want to say, well, look, I'll give you a day rate. I'm going to work on a day rate, but I could get all this done in whatever 2 or 3 days. You can say, well, actually, this is the value of the timber, and then you can make the decision from there. It does sound as if you would want somebody that's able to work in a small woodland and avoid the use of big machines.
Yeah. What about brash?
Brash. Well, what sort of brash are we talking about? Is it coniferous? Is it broadleaf?
Coniferous. I think it's Norway spruce.
Norway spruce. It can be quite dense. I mean, leaving brash can be good for creating deadwood habitat. But if it's really dense brash, thick, heavy brash, then it can, for example, prevent natural regen from coming through successful. On the flip side, it can protect it from deer browsing. Some brash is good. And obviously, if the soils are wet, it's useful to be able to run the machines across a brash mat to reduce impact on those soils as well. There's only really a value in brash if there's plenty of it, and they can do brash recovery. That would mean, you know, large volumes, large quantities to get the right type of machines on site. So then you're suddenly talking about, you know, bigger machines, which I think we've said aren't probably going to be appropriate for your situation.
Might be perhaps me to get my own chip ring and get rid of it and make use of it.
Yeah, if you wanted to get rid, then yeah, you could chip it. Obviously, it's not necessarily a great thing to burn brash in terms of an environmental protection point of view. And if you are planning on burning brush, then you should certainly apply for an appropriate license. I think that's off the government website. You can get one. You've got to identify the spot where you're burning the brush and the reason why you're doing it.
I could probably use it for mulch around all the hedges and new planting. Yeah. Good, thanks very much.
No, pleasure.
Does anyone else have any other questions? I've got one more, Will. Yeah,
sure.
Seasonality. How does seasonality affect contracting work?
Good question, Rosanna. Quite significantly. It is quite challenging, actually. It can be for contractors in terms of seasonality. Obviously, over the winter it's wetter. That brings its own challenges. And then obviously as we move into spring and summer, it's bird nesting season, and that brings its own challenges. And then as they go through spring, summer, a lot of woodland owners will start to think about putting their next lot of pheasants down. So suddenly summertime becomes autumn and it's pheasant shooting season. So actually you think, well, when can we do this work? So yeah, you have to plan definitely carefully around that. Hopefully the weather's kind and you've got windows of opportunity there. If you have to start felling in spring, summer, then you must look out for bird nesting sites beforehand, particularly protected species, and identify and agree those with whoever's doing the work, and mark them on your constraints map, for example. But obviously, best practice is to avoid that. So yeah, it's a good question, seasonality, definitely. There can be a slight impact seasonality in terms of timber sales as well. Ollie was talking about that last week. We've seen a bit of a lull recently in the timber market, and as we go through spring, it tends to pick up as the demand for timber from the sawmills starts to pick up again. But best to listen to Ollie's much more competent description of all that in last week's seminar.
Well, if no one else has any questions, this is, I think, the last chance, and I can pop in the links that we were talking about to the previous webinars. I think it's nice to move on to that. So yeah.
And we can forward on links, can't we, to some of that information that I've covered, for example, the feeder guides, if that's of interest to people. I think
Absolutely.
We can forward on those at a later point, those links, etc. If people find that helpful. And then we'll keep you posted on if we do end up producing some kind of a directory. We'll keep you posted on all that as well, and hopefully some of you can join us at next week's webinar that the guys from My Forest are presenting on the geospatial maps, which I'm looking forward to myself.
Looking forward to it. You know, I think it's an existing platform, and they've developed a new tool to help you basically walk around your wood with a map on your phone, and you can plot features as you go. So yeah, it's highly anticipated, I think, from them and by us, and hopefully by people that use My Forest as well. So I've just popped in the links in the chat there to our YouTube channel, which is, as Will's mentioned, we've had previous webinars on a range of topics, including how to sell your timber. So you can access those on YouTube. We've also got a woodland owner survey, which is closing tomorrow night at midnight, just to understand attitudes and around woodland owners and their woodlands. Joe, don't worry if you're late. As I say, you can catch up on YouTube, and the link should be up in the next couple of days. We'll also post links, and there'll be links in the descriptions on YouTube as well to the resources that Will has mentioned. there are obviously quite a lot of resources out there to support owners through all stages of the management process. That might not all be in one place, but there are a lot of there's a lot of information out there. So we'll keep you posted on that. And then finally, hopefully you've all signed up to the Northwoods newsletter. That's one way to keep up to date with our future activities. And I think there'll be an evaluation survey that goes out, I think perhaps now to your emails that you sign up to through Eventbrite as well. So please do let us know if you've got any feedback on this event or anything you'd like to see moving forwards. We really do welcome feedback, and we can adapt kind of future activities, you know, depending on what you'd like to see more of. If it's more of forestry contracting, fantastic. If it's something else, a different aspect of woodland management, then, you know, please do let us know, and we can adapt accordingly. So I think finally, thank you very much, Will, for presenting and answering lots of questions from me, and also from Andy. Thank you, Andy, to your questions. And thank you everyone else for attending, and I hope you found it really useful. So without further ado, I think I'll say good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night.